This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I'm a sucker for the new idea. I'm a sucker for the new entrepreneurial idea. I've tried a lot of things in my lifetime. Some things have been great successes. Some things not. Some things just okay. I have not given it, though, the, let's say, scientific method approach. Often, a lot of my approach has been a good idea, perhaps from a lot of experience, a good idea launched, and if there's some acceptance, I run with it. But that's not necessarily the best way to approach it. My guest today talks about a good way to approach this very issue. His book, The Human Element, Overcoming the Resistance That Awaits New Ideas. My guest today is David Schonthal. David makes the case, and I agree, that we all too much instinctively believe that if we add enough value, people will eventually say yes. But it's the psychological frictions. We don't think about that enough. And frictions create that drag on innovation. And if you can't get around the human element, forget it. Whatever new thing that you're launching, whatever new idea that you've got, it's not going to happen. I hope you enjoy this conversation with David Schonthal as we get into the human element. It might sound basic to people, but I think for a guy like you, and I can appreciate it from afar, the word idea, wow, this is a really interesting word. I mean, most people probably really don't sit down and think about the word idea a lot, or perhaps ever, or they might use it describing something, but they really don't get down to the essence as to how interesting this word has been in the last, let's say, since the dot-com bubble ripped off in 1995. Ideas have just fast and furious changed the face of civilization, and perhaps unlike any other 25-year period since.
Have to agree. The other thing is that ideas now are easier to make real than ever before. For example, you referenced the dot-com boom back in the late 90s. If you had an idea for an internet company in 1998 and you wanted to get that business up and running, you had to invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to make that idea real by hiring a development shop and buying your own servers, et cetera. Now, to make an idea like that real costs about 99% less. Anybody with an internet account and a laptop computer can create an e-commerce site in about an hour. So ideas, not only are they talked about more, they're everywhere, and it's created quite a noise.
I guess the trick, though, and I hate to use the example, but it's such a great example to start off with. When you have this idea, will you, not necessarily you, David, but will you stick with it to the bitter end? Will you take it over the hump, so to speak? And that's where the challenge becomes a lot of where you've gone in your new work is from that germination, sitting around, I don't know, maybe in the bathroom or something. You have some great idea, and then you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the next new thing. You have really gone down the path of systematizing is the right word, but really coding it out for us to understand idea from germination, what can hinder it, and how to get it, frankly, getting aerodynamic and getting it to the end.
Well, I've spent a large part of my career, whether it's in entrepreneurship, venture capital, or my work with IDEO, coming up with ideas and making them tangible enough to deliver to the market. But sometimes, no matter how good an idea was, I was always surprised by even the best ideas struggling to be adopted. The point you made earlier, ideas in and of themselves are inert. They don't necessarily have a lot of value. Most of the value comes from the execution and the success of getting that idea to market. And to me, that's actually the difference between an idea and an innovation. An idea is just a theoretical sketch on a notepad to some extent. An innovation is something that actually makes impact in the market. Usually the thing that stands in the way of an idea becoming an innovation is not just the execution of building it, but also the resistance that that new idea faces out in the market, which is really why Lauren Nordgren, my co-author, and I turned our attention to this phenomenon, which is why do so many good ideas struggle to actually benefit the lives of the people they're designed for?
Let me keep you at a word you just said a second ago that I have some recollection of, because I actually am the proud owner of the IDEO cards. I don't know if I've got them currently with me in Saigon, but I've got them somewhere. I've got
the method cards.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and explain a little bit about IDEO, because that probably went past many people as you just said it in there.
IDEO is a global design and innovation company. We were started back in the late 80s as a industrial design shop, a company that made mechanical or physical products. And over the years, IDEO has evolved from being a designer of physical products to using what we call design thinking, which is not design as an activity. It's not making something more beautiful or a product more usable. Design thinking is looking at the world and solving business problems as a designer would. And the way human-centered designers solve problems is by recognizing that at the end of every business process, at the end of every business model, whether it's B2B or B2B2C, the end of every business process is a human being. And the more deeply you understand the needs of those human beings, social, functional, and emotional, the more interesting your products become, the more interesting your innovations become, and frankly, the stickier they are. So IDEO has evolved over the last 40 years of its existence to applying design thinking to everything from creating products to creating services to designing things for governments, organizational design, strategy, all practicing this discipline of design thinking and human-centered design.
That design thinking, the fact that so many shops, so to speak, corporations will farm out to IDEO speaks to how rare that type of thinking is in a way. It's almost like there's this inertia inside companies. They can't pull the trigger, or they don't know how to pull the trigger, or it's just easier to say, let's don't make a decision in-house. Let's hire it out to these other folks over here that specialize in ideas and specialize in outside the box thinking.
Yes, to some extent, though, I would say more and more in every year it changes. More and more companies are actually seeing the value of bringing design thinking into their organizations to try to imbibe some of that culture into the fabric of the company. Traditionally, IDEO was one of only a handful of design consultancies out in the world practicing this craft. And today, even some companies that I never would have thought 10 years ago would have gotten into design, like McKinsey or BCG, are firmly on board with design thinking, and human-centered design is a core part of their practice. IDEO, one of the things that makes IDEO great is the fact that not only does the company employ some of these really bright multidisciplinary thinkers that always approach problems in interesting ways, but there's a speed to the way IDEO works. And frankly, there's a tolerance for risk in the way that IDEO works, that while some companies would say, yeah, we want to work quick and we want to move fast and break things, or whatever the jargon du jour is, their willingness or their desire to do it and their willingness to point it out, sort of give up the corporate inertia of process and procedure and being risk averse. IDEO tends to bridge that gap between what companies aspire to do and what they're actually capable of doing.
Let's talk about rejection. I think this is the real root of the issue. And I have found, as kind of an independent guy, as an author, I've been very comfortable taking risks for my life and taking chances and not asking for permission and just doing it. And if it felt good enough for me, let's roll it out there. And so far, so good, whether that came to naming a book title or starting a business or creating a product that I thought was good, but I had no data to back it, A/B data or testing to back it up. I just put it out there. And many decades later, it's kind of worked well for me. I don't know if that's just been gut level instinct. I'm sure I've made mistakes and errors, and I probably wish I'd had more of the IDEO training. I probably would have made a lot more money. But it's a tricky thing to really imbue this kind of thought process to folks that are perhaps, let's just pick on maybe a typical engineer or CPA. It's all about the rules. It's all about the mechanics, and stick in your silo and don't, as you just talked about risk taking. Don't take too many risks.
I think that there are some people that really thrive in structure and thrive in linear process. Design is inherently nonlinear. I think a lot of people would like to believe that it is, that you come up with an idea, then you make it real, then you put it out in the world, and you get some feedback, and you go take it to market at scale. Design is much messier than I think a lot of people think. So it does take a tolerance for ambiguity. It takes inherent optimism, knowing that there's going to be a way forward, even though you might get frustrated along the way. It takes perseverance. But there is also, I think, some mythology that design has no process, that you go into a room and you throw these Post-it notes on the wall and it's this big messy process, and out the other end comes this really cool thing. Design, when practiced well, and innovation, when practiced well, actually follows process. There is science behind it. And I think design thinking in particular is this really beautiful blend of scientific process. In fact, very much like the scientific method, and a little bit of alchemy and a little bit of serendipity. But some people are comfortable in that environment and some aren't. And typically those that aren't and still want the benefits of it tend to turn to design consultancies.
As you mentioned, the scientific method, it's an interesting phrase to bring up today. And I'm not going off on a tangent here, but so much of the public discourse today is people talking about science like they supposedly can't understand frankly, when you read them, the simple steps of the scientific method. I mean, yes, it gets complex to do it, but understanding what the scientific method is, I think most people can wrap their arms around that pretty quickly. It doesn't mean they can execute quickly, but there's no reason why everybody can't have a handle on what the scientific method is.
Yeah, I mean, we're all taught it typically early in our lives, but I think if you boil it down to its essence, which is that you have a hypothesis about how you think the world should work or what might be true out in the world, designing an experiment to find out if that hypothesis is real, and then modifying the idea or the hypothesis depending on what that experiment shows. I think a lot of people practice that without knowing that they're practicing it, but this kind of discovery driven way of building strategy, building businesses, building ideas. I think a lot of us do it without knowing that that's what we're doing.
How did you stumble, if stumble's the right word, how did you find your way into this world of ideas and innovation?
Sort of the same with every aspect of my career. The answer is entirely accidentally. As we talked about before we started recording, that we both spent a lot of time in San Diego. I just moved back from San Diego to Chicago. And in San Diego, I had spent my career in the startup space, specifically the healthcare startup space, and moved back to Chicago and had to reinvent myself a little bit because I didn't want to be traveling back and forth to San Diego. Went to go mentor at a startup accelerator in the United States called Techstars, went to go mentor some startups at Techstars Chicago. And at the time was placed on a mentoring team with another gentleman from Chicago who happened to be the then head of the Chicago studio of IDEO. And IDEO was interested in learning more about how to work with startups and emerging businesses. And I was more interested in learning about how design works in the design process. And so based on that kind of symbiotic relationship, my relationship with IDEO was formed.
You started IDEO. What are some of those first, for us sitting on the sidelines, we now know that IDEO, this large concern going back 40 years, what were some of those first light bulbs that once you were on the inside, that you started to understand, wow, this culture, this ethos, this understanding this particular firm has? What were some of those light bulb moments that really struck you early on?
There's a bunch. This is seemingly insignificant, but I remember the first few days that I was working there, I would come home and tell my wife these stories about even their Monday morning lunch meetings are so beautifully designed. Everybody does a great job of storytelling, and they're so creative in terms of how they share their project updates. Everything about that organization, from the way we ran meetings to the way we welcomed guests to the way we onboarded new employees, was so thoughtful and so well designed that I just remember marveling at how even the smallest things were so different and unique at IDEO relative to what they would have been at any other firms. I think first and foremost, the fact that they put care and design thinking into everything that they did. Second is that it's an organization that really lives its values. IDEO has some pretty, I think, ambitious values. Things like talk less, do more, be optimistic. All of these things that I think many corporations would love to say they do and seem like platitudes on a company wall. But IDEO really does live those things in almost every interaction. Just from the first moment I arrived, I could tell that this was a very different place to work. And these were some of the most creative and bright people I would ever work with in my career.
I ask these questions, which might seem, I don't know, mundane to you, but I think for so many people, they are in a job and they're in a particular silo and they're just, I'm on my career to make money. And I think sometimes we forget about the art of everything. And if one can find their way into a world where you can be involved in making art and making money, I mean, it is just kind of a joyful type feeling.
I guess it depends a little bit about how you define art. But if you define art as creation more broadly and craft, I totally agree. And I think that one of the things that really benefits, frankly, entrepreneurs or mission-driven organization founders or people that work for nonprofits, I think the blend of craft and commerce, the blend of art and what they do for a career is almost indistinguishable. And I think that does provide people with a lot of motivation and a lot of joy.
Okay, so we got a little bit of a setup here, understand you a little bit better. Let's get into some examples. You've got some great examples in your new book, The Human Element. I know a lot of people, when you're going to talk with folks, they're going to bring up a core example in your new book. And I'm going to also, but I'm going to bring it up because there's one element that this particular person, this particular salesperson, I'm going to let you describe it, but there's something that person said that reminded me of myself. I'm not tooting my own horn here, but I've had two people. One of the things that I will do is I will help people in certain trading strategies, quant strategies. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've had two customers that have come to me in the last decade that have said to me, and both of them said 8 years. They said, Mike, I've been reading your books. I've been going to your blog. I've been listening to your podcast for 8 years. Now I have finally decided to level up and I would like to take a more advanced step with you. 8 years. 8 years they paid attention to me, and then they finally decided to take a step up and to do something more significant. You've got an example where a guy talks about 7 or 8 years as well. Why don't I let you go into that example? Because it's a fun way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking.
It is a great story. You're referring to Ali Reda, and Ali Reda is the most successful car salesman in the United States in history. To put this in context, which I did not appreciate, Ali Reda sells, so the average car salesperson in the United States sells about 125, 126 cars a year. Ali Reda sells about 1,600 or 1,700 cars a year, so about 12 times the national average. And one of the things that my co-author Laura Nordgren and I wanted to do was find out what is it that makes this salesperson so superior relative to his peers. And after spending some time interviewing Ali and learning a little bit about his methodology, I think the most salient point is that he doesn't view his job as a sales job at all. And one of the things that we talk about in this book, just to put it in context, is that in many cases, people's intuitions about how to get somebody to buy into an idea or a new product or a new service are flawed. I think a lot of us think that the way to get somebody excited about a product or service is to heighten the appeal of the product or service, to add a feature or benefit or discount the price, somehow make the idea feel more magnetic. And what Ali points out is a great metaphorical example in this book. What Ali points out, people who want to buy a car have probably already made the decision about what kind of car they're interested in before they ever walk into a dealership. And while most dealers will immediately seize that moment and start trying to sell that person all of the different features and benefits of a particular car, Ali takes a radically different approach, which is not to inform people of all of the features and benefits that brought them into the dealership in the first place, but rather to recognize that the idea of a new car already had enough appeal that someone was willing to give up their Saturday to go and see it. Now, Ali's job isn't about heightening the magnetism of that car. It's about removing all of the friction that stands in the way of that purchase. And if Ali can get rid of all of that anxiety and all of that concern that people have about a new car, his job is made much easier because he's not selling you an idea. He's just removing the obstacles that stand in the way of the progress you already want to make.
What are some good friction examples there that we can imagine?
I'm speaking predominantly from an American background here and to an American audience, but car dealerships in the United States have a pretty big stigma. And the stigma is that somehow through lots of experience and dramatization and even people's own experience in car dealerships, we all expect to be taken advantage of by a car dealer. We expect to be sold stuff that we don't need. We expect all of these bells and whistles to add up at the end. We expect high pressure sales tactics. People going into a car dealership are already on guard from the moment they walk in. They're preparing themselves to be sold to, they're preparing themselves to have the wool pulled over their eyes. What most car dealers don't recognize and appreciate as well as Ali Reda does is if that is how they walk in, the first job you have is to try to remove some of that anxiety and remove that emotional friction. And so what Ali does, to your point about sometimes taking 6 or 7 months, instead of saying, hey, there's a car here, I've got 3 people interested, and if you don't buy it, it's going to go out the door. Ali Reda will say something like, look, it seems like you need a little bit more time to think about this. And there's a few decisions that you need to make. No pressure. You let me know when you're ready. I will always be here. Give me a call whenever you've got a question. And whenever it's time for you to buy the car, come back to me. Or sometimes Ali will say, you shouldn't get this car from my dealership. You should get this other car from another brand from a totally different dealership. But what he does by making these recommendations, they're very antithetical to the typical salesperson, is he builds a reputation and a brand around himself as being a trusted advisor for anyone interested in buying a car. And while it may take 4 or 5 years for people to get comfortable to buy that car, get the financial ability to do it, he knows that when they're ready, he will be the person that they will go to, and he will no longer have to compete because they're buying him. They're not necessarily buying the car at the dealership.
Let me let you apply a little bit of your philosophy to this example, because this is really getting at, and this is the first time I've said it in this conversation, you've used the word friction, but this is really getting at the fuel friction conflict, right?
Yeah. The metaphor we use in the book to describe these two forces, again, most innovators or marketers or entrepreneurs think that the way to get somebody to adopt a new idea is to improve the idea or to communicate more clearly about the idea, that it's the idea that is the thing that we should be affecting to make sure that it successfully makes it to market. And we do it at the expense of appreciating that there are always these other forces pushing against an idea. If you picture one force going one direction towards change, there's another set of forces that push people away from change, but they're all typically hidden. But once we know that they're there, we'll be scanning for them all the time. And so in this book, we talk about the 4 primary frictions that stand in the way of innovation. The first one is inertia. How much does this new idea represent a break from the status quo? Human beings are creatures of habit. We tend to stick with what we know, sometimes even at the expense of knowing there's a better way to do something, just because it's familiar. There's the friction of effort, which is how much physical or mental or economic exertion is required to implement the change. Is it going to take a lot of hassle or mental exertion? And then emotion, which is there a way for audiences to be anxious about making the change, or do they feel threatened by the change? Does it have an ability to undermine people's needs? That's what we call emotional friction. And then the fourth is reactance, which is, does the idea threaten other people's core beliefs? Or more specifically, does the audience feel pressured to change? Because when we feel pressured to change, our human instinct is to push back against the change with equal amounts of pressure, providing this kind of intractable moment. And so what we know is that if we don't tame these 4 frictions when we're trying to introduce new ideas or new movements into the world, they will always struggle to make it to market successfully.
Your work reminds me of a conflict that I had in my life. I came on this journey to Asia in early 2013. As we talked earlier, I'd been in San Diego and I was using a silly Motorola flip phone, doing my 2-finger text or whatever it was. I mean, just typing on the numerical keypad. And I had a lot of friends that had already gone to iPhones and all that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, I wasn't going to make the change. But going to Asia, I was like, okay, I need to do something because I'm going to be on the road and all that kind of stuff. There's so many issues that I'm looking at in your work where it's like, why did I have all of those hesitations to make the switch? Because once you made the switch from using a flip phone with no browser or anything to an iPhone, it was like night and day. Going through your world and your work reminds me that I'm like a case study in making all of these errors back when I made the switch.
I did some work for a smartphone manufacturer around this very topic about getting people to switch from older analog phones or even one smartphone to another. During the interviews we did with people, the reasons to switch to a smartphone, whether it's an Apple smartphone or a Samsung or whatever, are so overwhelmingly compelling. FaceTime, you can have all of your applications on your phone, you can have your music. It's kind of a no-brainer, and the interfaces are relatively easy to use. When we did these interviews with people who finally had switched to a smartphone after years of sticking with their old phone, it was always surprising to me what held them back. It was always stupid, small stuff like, well, I know my Motorola StarTAC is not really going to be supported any longer, and getting an iPhone is a really good idea. But, I've got these 2 wall chargers and a car charger for my Motorola, and I don't really feel like buying new chargers. Or I've got a couple of cases for my smartphone. I really don't feel like getting new cases. And it's just, in the grand scheme of things, these really small things make the difference between somebody adopting or somebody not adopting. And yet they probably wouldn't even turn up in most innovation research because they seem so insignificant. But in the mind of this consumer, like, these are goods I already own. Like, I know this isn't perfect, but maybe I'll wait until the phone chargers go on the fritz and then I'll make the move. And it's just always surprising how small these changes need to be.
I was an Apple continuous user from the late 80s. I was using all these products. I had bought probably 20 computers already. I don't think I understood. I know I didn't understand that the iPhone, even 2013, 2014, I did not understand that was a laptop in my hand. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, more processing power in that device than in many of the laptops from just a decade earlier.
Right. I'm sure on stage, Steve Jobs told me that that's what it was, but for whatever reason, it was going in my ears and out my ears. It was not sticking.
Steve Jobs actually did a beautiful job. He's a master at introducing new ideas into the world.
Absolutely.
And it's actually kind of interesting that you mentioned him. We don't talk about him too much in the book, a little bit. One of the things that Steve Jobs and Apple have been able to do is make radical ideas feel familiar. One of the ways that we help people overcome this friction of inertia, which is the resistance to changing from the status quo, is to make unfamiliar ideas seem more familiar. And Apple has been good at this ever since its origin. I don't know if you remember back in the introduction of the first Macintosh computer, in order for the Macintosh to be differentiated from PCs, Steve Jobs wanted to introduce this new interface that was more user-friendly than a PC. And in order to do that, he was really choiceful about what he called things. Like when you wanted to write a paper online, word processing, it was called a document. And when you wanted to store your document, you put your document in a folder. And when you put your folder somewhere, you put it on a desktop. And when you wanted to throw something away, you threw it in the trash can. And he was very conscious of trying to make his products work the way the rest of your world works, which makes it more familiar. When you hear Steve Jobs introduce things like the iPod, which is a pretty radical idea. I mean, there were MP3 players, but rather than talk about all of the things that make the iPod special, he talked about, now you have this ability to have 1,000 songs in your pocket. Really using language that people can wrap their heads around, which takes a radical idea and makes it feel closer to home, which makes it easier for people to warm up to. And so he was a master at overcoming the friction of inertia by making ideas more familiar, unfamiliar ideas more familiar.
Great loss. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I know he's had so many, books and films, and I'm sure some people say, oh, there's too much about Steve Jobs. He really did change everything in terms of the devices I use every day. I mean, I use an Apple laptop, I use an iMac, I use an iPhone, I use an iPad every day. That's all him,
So I teach a design class at Kellogg where I'm on the faculty. I usually show a picture of an iPhone in one of my lectures, and I'll ask the question of the audience, which is usually a bunch of executives. I'll say, how many of you have ever seen a 2-year-old use an iPhone? 70% of the hands will go up. And I'll say, and when a 2-year-old goes into your iPhone and they go into your pictures, what do they do? And people will start in the air showing me that swiping motion. And I'll ask this audience, I'll say, how do they know how to do that? How do they know how to do that? Invariably, half of the room will say something like, it's intuitive. And I'll say, yes, but intuitive is an output of good design. It's not an input of good design. It is intuitive because in the rest of this 2-year-old's world, when they want to move content from one place to another, they put their finger on it and slide it back and forth. Apple products are intuitive and easy to use because they're designed the way the rest of your world works. You don't have to read an owner's manual to use an Apple product. It works the way you expect from the moment you pick it up. And I would argue that today, if a product or service requires an owner's manual, it's probably just poor design. Nobody will tolerate reading an owner's manual anymore.
So I don't need an owner's manual to use Microsoft Word. I use it because I like the track changes feature. I just jumped to the opposite side of Apple and Steve Jobs. Here's a particular product, MS Word, installed everywhere. What features on MS Word do people really use? It is loaded down with so much, quote, design. It's like the antithesis of Apple. Now, look, it's made an absolute bloody fortune for Microsoft. It's made people billionaires. I'm not denying that. But in terms of like the use case, how we use it, it's just an interesting contrast against Apple. So here we can have these examples. We talk about Apple and Steve Jobs, but there are some very successful companies out there that produce very popular products. A guy like you could probably just sit around all day and make design notes that are not so nice about.
Maybe. I mean, I do enjoy a good critique, but you raise a really excellent point, which is in Microsoft Word is often an example that interaction designers hold up. At least old versions of Microsoft Word are examples of software design that interaction designers will point to and be like, see, that's what happens when you don't have design discipline. And that basically means just because you can add a feature to a product doesn't mean that you should. And one of the essences of good design is really simplicity. One of the ways products are become more approachable is through their simplicity. If you're intimidated by a product the first moment that you see it, talk about emotional friction, boy, now I'm paying for features I don't need. Now I just want to do simple stuff, but it's overshooting my needs with all of these extra features that are making it more confusing for me. Sometimes simplicity is actually the thing that makes it easier for people to say yes than trying to make a Swiss Army knife.
They switched the save button on an MS Word doc recently. They switched it from, I think it was on the right side where it normally would be, to the left side. I have not adjusted to this in the last year. I don't know why they did this. It just completely goes against how one uses a Mac, and they switched the damn button from the right side to the left side.
It's crazy what people get hung up on. I mean, this story in the book about Tropicana orange juice, which is an orange juice brand in the United States, at one point in time in like 2009, they paid a fortune to have an advertising agency redesign their logo and brand, which used to be an orange with a straw stuck in it, to this more modern, holistic looking package. It's the same product, same size, same everything. They just changed what the logo looked like, threw it in this new container, put it on the shelves, and people just went bananas. They like rebelled against it. Months later, after losing 20% of the revenue, I think it was only after about 30 days after the launch, they went back to the old package just because people were so rattled by something as simple as a logo change. And then you start thinking about things that are functional, like buttons on software. It's amazing how small things can make people super resistant.
Let's take it to an example, which is going to be a little controversial and opens up Pandora's box on where we've gone so far. And this would be medical marijuana. Here we have a situation for a long time. In fact, one of my trading books featured a trader who was pushing for the legalization of marijuana back in like early to mid 80s. So he was big time pushing this so far ago. Guys like Bill Maher have pushed it for a long time. And then obviously there was some breakthroughs. I'm going to let you tell the story. I'm going to get into perhaps the negative side of this, but we finally got to a point to where many states, many localities have said, okay, medical marijuana is okay. Now, that was the way it got it done, but I think now it's just a way to kind of get marijuana legalized.
You're referring to the case we have at the end of the book. So at the end of the book, we have case studies that really put friction theory into practice. And one of them is around the legalization of marijuana. And yes, as you're pointing out, what we describe in that case is the importance of taking the step to make it legal for medical use prior to getting it legal for recreational and more broad use. And were it not for that approval for medical indications, the full recreational use of marijuana, which is now in, I think, 10 or 11 states in the United States, probably would have been impossible. You needed that interim step to make the radical seem less radical, to make the unfamiliar seem more familiar. What you've just identified was crucial in what I think will ultimately be a much broader legalization of marijuana in almost every state of the country. Were it not for that medical middle step, I think we would be having a very different conversation.
What's interesting about that, and you point out this also in your work, people are going to have different views on this, influence versus manipulation. Maybe medical marijuana is not necessarily the best example, but look, I personally, the libertarian side of me says, if some guy wants to sit at his house and do bong hits, the last thing I want to do is have my tax dollars go to racing into his house with DEA SWAT team, arresting the guy and dragging him down to jail. That's the last thing I want my tax dollars going to. But on the flip side, I think it's hard to make the argument that we know all of the, quote, negative effects if marijuana is in use on it, let's say, as wide a scale as alcohol. Because clearly alcohol, I'm not proposing to go back to prohibition, but clearly alcohol abuse in a place like America is not a small thing. It gets complicated, doesn't it?
It is a very complicated issue. It's a very emotional issue. It's a very political issue, not unlike many issues facing many countries at the moment. But yes, there's a lot of dimensions to consider and still more to learn.
Well, I'm not going to let you escape too early on that. Where I want to go is not necessarily the controversy. It's the idea that, okay, now that we're talking about these issues of overcoming resistance, I mean, there's an ethical side to this. Some people can apply, it's kind of like Bob Cialdini's persuasion techniques. I've had Bob in this podcast. He's a great interview. But if somebody wants to take persuasion techniques and use them for ill or for bad, they can. And so I guess getting people to overcome resistance, the ethical side of it, this can really be a can of worms, can't it?
We're very careful at the very beginning of this book talking about ethics, because you're right. Any sort of influence or persuasion technique could be used for positive and also for negative benefit. The way that we define it is that it really boils down to intention. We are very clear at the beginning of the book about what we think the right intention for the use of these methods are and where we draw the line. It was important for us to put that right in chapter 1 because of the significance of exactly what you said.
Let me take it to another example, kind of a fun one. I've never used it. I'm not saying I'm some kind of prude or I wouldn't use it. Maybe I was just born in the wrong decade. I do know a lot of my male friends who are in their 30s, active participants dating with Tinder. There was a certain friction that had to be overcome to make a dating app work. I think I've said this on the podcast once before. I think I did one dating app date on Match.com when I was in San Diego, bloody long time ago. But speak to this friction that the dating apps had to overcome, in particular Tinder.
So if you think about the context of online dating, for traditional dating sites in particular, like Match.com or JDate or Christian Mingle or eHarmony, there is a series of steps that are fairly common amongst them, which is you've got to go in and you've got to set up a profile, then you've got to scour the website for people that you might be interested in speaking to. You have to reach out to them and make an overture to get together or to talk on the phone, whatever it might be. And they have to reply to that overture and say, yes, I'm interested in talking. I'm interested in taking this next step. Each one of those steps for that individual carries some risk. It's the risk of the effort I put into setting up my profile, but even more significantly, it's the risk of me putting myself out there and saying, you're interesting to me. I'd like to talk to you. And then risking the rejection that follows, or the feeling of rejection that follows if they don't write back. And the way Match.com has been created, it carries some emotional risk for the person who's actually reaching out to the other person, because there's the fear that that person might reject them. So that brings some anxiety. One of the beautiful things that Tinder does, no matter what you think about Tinder or dating apps in general, one of the beautiful things that Tinder does is it is designed to be about the most frictionless experience there is when it comes to dating. You set up a profile instantly just by connecting it to your Facebook account. And then based on geography or wherever, it will just start serving you images of people that they think you might be interested in. And you swipe left if you're not interested, and you swipe right if you are. But if you swipe right and somebody else swipes right on you that's also in Tinder, now you've got what we would refer to as like a double opt-in. I find you attractive and interesting. You find me attractive and interesting. So now when we talk, or now when I approach you in a restaurant or a coffee shop, you know that we've both opted into this engagement. And it's not like me tapping you on the shoulder at a bar and saying, hey, can I buy you a drink? And you saying, oh, no, you're not my type, or I don't date people that are short, or I don't date people that are tall. Tinder removed all of this emotional friction from the experience, just making it easier for people to get out and meet others. And by removing the friction, they quickly came from almost obscurity to being one of the most dominant dating apps in the world.
I don't know if you know the answer. I'm curious. It's such a simple process. It makes me wonder how much time, effort, money, development went into figuring out that simple process.
I don't know is the answer, but I have to believe, going back to some of the stuff we talked about originally, like I have to believe there was a good amount of human-centered design involved in it. And this also goes back to the point we made about simplicity. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best solutions. I mean, Tinder has almost no features other than swipe right and swipe left. And it's because of its simplicity that it actually got mass adoption. But I'm guessing, I don't know the origin story, but I'm guessing there was an insight that somebody had, which is if I could look around this bar, I could look around this club and identify all the people that were single and all the people that were single that were interested in me, boy, it would make my dating life so much different than all of these trial and error approaches I've been using so far. Like that seems like a fairly human-centered insight.
You talk about intuition in this conversation. We talk about simplicity. I mentioned being an iPad user for the last couple of years. I got the iPad Pro from a couple of years ago. It's a pretty sweet device. I have to say, it's pretty common for me these days that when I put the iPad down and I get in front of a laptop or whatever, I find myself looking to pinch and drag on the laptop screen.
Sure.
It's only a matter of time. Like, when is Apple going to solve that problem? I want to pinch and grab everywhere, right?
Well,
That sounds funny, right?
One of two things is going to happen. Either the MacBooks are going to start having touchable screens like the current Lenovo's do, like the current ThinkPads do, or the iPad is just going to become closer and closer to a computer. And eventually these things will just merge into a single line of devices. But yeah, I think I do the same thing, and I'm sure others do too. And it's probably only a matter of time till there's a touchable screen for a Mac.
You had another great example in your book, great example with a furniture company. I was trying to visualize, as I was reading it, I was trying to visualize what's going to be the solution. I didn't guess it. I didn't guess what it seemed obvious, but it's double faceted because not only is it the removal of the old furniture, it is the where the old furniture goes, which that makes somebody feel good.
It was actually a really fun story to write. One of the companies that I had done some work for a couple of years ago with our portfolio companies in the venture capital fund and other work with IDEO, I spend a lot of time going into companies and helping them figure out what is standing in the way of their success. They've got a product that everybody says they want. All the market research is saying this is great. People are going to buy it. The price point is perfect. And then when they go to launch it, for some reason, people aren't clicking buy or they aren't actually following through on what they said they would do. Companies are left to wonder, why is it that our market research says one thing and the practice is something different? And in this particular case, this is a furniture company that makes custom furniture. They make custom furniture, which is typically pretty expensive, at least in the United States. They make custom furniture that is really beautiful design, very urban, very chic, very modern, and they do it at about 75% cheaper than other custom furniture companies. Typically, it takes about 10 weeks for them to deliver, which is a pretty short amount of time for custom furniture. So tons of magnetism for this offer. Great furniture, great price, great service, great design. They would find that thousands and thousands of people would come to their website and spend hours designing these custom sofas on the website or going into the store and really making this perfect piece. But before they would hit buy on the website or before they would put their credit card down in the store, for some reason, people would just literally or figuratively abandon their carts. They'd walk away, having clearly identified something that they like, having designed it specifically for their needs. And so this company was wondering, what is it that's actually standing in the way of people clicking purchase? What we did is we interviewed about 12 of their existing customers that spent some time either designing a piece and walked away or designing a piece and eventually following through. And one of the surprising culprits in this story for why people wouldn't go ahead and purchase the new couch that turned up again and again and again was this question about what are they going to do with their existing couch? This thing that's been in their living room for the last 10 years, how are they going to get it out of there? When they get it out of there, I mean, if they are able to get it out of there, are they going to put it in the alley? Will the trash company take it away? Do I have to take it apart? Like, how am I going to get this big sofa that I have out of my house and so that the new sofa can come in? And until people were able to get their heads around how they were going to do that, they weren't comfortable buying a new sofa, which seems crazy. One of the most elegant and simple design changes that this company made was simply to include free removal of the existing sofa at the same time as the delivery of the new sofa. And that simple change just relieved all of that anxiety and just improved conversion by a significant amount. And then to your point, they went an extra step, which is people were always concerned about this perfectly good sofa that they had. And was it going to go to a dump? Was it going to contribute to pollution problems or landfill issues? So the other thing that this company introduced in small scale was the ability to donate that sofa to a family in need, either through charity, through Goodwill, or through Salvation Army. And so not only now were they removing the friction of having that existing sofa in their house, they were also giving people this feel-good factor that was going to be donated somewhere in need, which just gave them more wind in their sails for making the purchase. But the simple thing of removing the sofa was really all it took to get people to buy. And it was a problem that was hiding in plain sight. It just took spending some time interviewing their customers to realize what it was.
Absolutely great story. It's just plain sight. It's there. The light bulb goes off the moment you hear the solution. You're like, oh, wow. Why did I not think of that?
Exactly. And it's also surprising to me how seemingly small and innocuous things can make all the difference in the world. The existing sofa was the thing that stood in the way of this big life change, this big purchase. Another kind of fun story, I was doing some work for a luxury car manufacturer that makes $100,000 plus automobiles. And we were interviewing people about what it was that ultimately got them to buy that automobile on a specific day. So what was it about this circumstance that made today the day to buy this car? The stories that we would hear from people about the day they decided to buy whatever that car would be, whether it was a Porsche or a Lamborghini or an Audi, always went something like this. Well, I've been driving this BMW or I've been driving this Mercedes for a long time and it's fine. I probably got another 3 years on it, but I've always wanted this other car. And one day I was driving my car to work and I got a nail in the tire and I realized that I would have to buy a new tire. And if I had to buy one tire, I was going to have to buy two tires. And you know what? Instead of spending the $500 to buy new tires, I just decided to buy a $150,000 car. And you're like, what? The competition for you buying this car was fixing your tires, but small stuff can make huge impacts. You just have to be able to do the research and listen for the right things to figure out how those moments show up.
I have to share a silly moment. It's not exactly in the same headspace. I don't necessarily know that it's such a big issue, but I recall early on having a little bit of success with my business, but I was still just a guy who had all kinds of computers and Ethernet cables in his house. And there's basically no furniture. I'm not even sure if I threw a mattress in the bedroom or something. It was like just computers everywhere and nothing. It was completely insane. My late 20s, early 30s. One day I got some big date lined up with some woman. I literally went into Crate and Barrel that day. I was like, I need to buy this. I bought all the house furniture. Like, it was these crazy trigger moments. Like, okay, I can't invite somebody to the house and have nothing but computers laying everywhere. I think this is so true for a lot of us, right? We do crazy, crazy stuff and then some unusual trigger. And marketers and designers and business people, they want to know all this insane stuff that's inside our heads, but sometimes it's hard to pull it out, huh?
That is exactly why this book is called The Human Element, which is that most of the things that stand in the way of progress are uniquely human phenomenon. They're often staring you straight in the face. You just kind of have to look at the world through a certain lens to be able to spot them. And our ambition for the book is to kind of pull back the curtain and show people like, these are the things that stand in the way. You're probably looking right at them without appreciating the role that they play. And usually the solutions are pretty easy and elegant, which is, I think, the most surprising and delighting part of this is spotting the problem is usually the biggest hassle. The solution usually presents itself pretty quickly.
Let me ask you one little final look into the future question. Do you have any perspective or prediction or crystal ball gaze as to the next thing that will make us all kind of go, wow, or that we have to use that? I don't feel like I've had that for a while. Social media, whatever. Okay, Apple's got some cool products, but what is the next new thing that's going to cause all of civilization to say, oh my gosh, I've got to use that. I've got to have that. Not putting you on the spot or anything, you know?
Well, yeah. What I would say, and this is probably biased by my area of interest, is I think it's going to come in medicine. And I think it's going to come in personalized medicine and genomic medicine. I think we're quickly realizing, and have for a while when it comes to drugs, that a certain therapeutic that works for you and has brilliant outcomes for you might work very differently for me. And that's not because the drug is different. It's just because we have different genomes. And the more that people are able to map their genome, which eventually I think will be reduced to like $50 to do it, the more people will understand what medicines, what foods, what environments, what behaviors are specifically designed for their health benefit. And I think the more that we realize that healthcare is truly individual and the more solutions come out to allow us to have individualized healthcare, personalized medicine, I think we will look back and say, how did we ever practice medicine any other way? I mean, we were doing sort of shock and awe, one size fits all, but now that we've sort of looked into the matrix and realized that there's ways of personalizing therapies and personalizing behavior change for specific individuals, I think that will be a radical change. And I think we're starting to see it with things like these mRNA vaccines and other types of metabolic and genomic medicines. We're at the dawn of this, and it's going to be an exciting time.
Great answer. It got me thinking immediately. The book, The Human Element, Overcoming the Resistance That Awaits New Ideas. There is definitely a resistance there in us crazy, batshit crazy Homo sapiens. There is definitely a resistance there.
As there always has been in humankind.
Hey, David, where can we send people? Amazon for the book, but is there a website you would like to direct people to?
It's available for pre-order on Amazon and other book retailers. There's also a landing page for the book, humanelementbook.com, where you can find information, get chapter samples, and some worksheets and tools.
Okay. I hope I did not make you go crazy with my meandering all over the map conversation. I think great design, when you see it, it just makes you happy.
And sometimes great design, when you see it, you don't even see it. What people don't realize is almost everything is designed. And when you start believing that everything is designed, you start noticing little nuances and details. Sometimes the best designs are the ones that you don't notice because they never get in your way.
Great insights. I wish you well, sir. Good luck with the book.
Thank you. I'll come find you if I'm ever in Saigon.
Absolutely. Hey, take care. Thank you.
Take it easy, Michael. Bye-bye.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.